I think that we as PMs give that expertise away by trying to convince everybody that everybody's a PM instead of saying, you may do PM stuff, but you are not a project manager.
Welcome to the Disgruntled PM Podcast, your weekly therapy session for the chaotic world of project management, transforming daily frustrations into real action.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Trevor, the Disgruntled PM, and today is going to be a solo show because, as promised a couple weeks ago when I asked for listener questions, I wanted to do a Q&A show where I'm just answering your questions because I've had on a lot of amazing guests. We've shared a lot of fantastic information, both for me and I'm hoping for you. But I wanted to give you, the audience and the listener, a chance to be a part of the show more and actually have questions that you wanted answered on the show. So what I did was I put out the call on Facebook and through a few other social media platforms. I got a variety of questions that came in, and for uniformity's sake, I'm just going to leave names of people off of this and just read the questions as they were sent in and then give you my answers. So the first question we're going to cover today is to cover letter or not to cover letter. I'm assuming this is in reference to when you're applying for jobs or roles and you're going through the application process and it says, hey, do you want to submit a cover letter? The first thing I'll say is that if it requires you to submit a cover letter, then yes, you have to submit a cover letter. But I also want to break this down a little bit more to what is the purpose of a cover letter and what are you using this for if you're actually going to put one in? Because if you're going to submit a cover letter that just recycles all the information from your resume and sounds like it's a one page version of your resume where you're telling the story of your resume, I don't think that adds value. I think that when you're talking about if you're going to include a cover letter or not, you need to think about what's the purpose of this that you're trying to get across, because let's assume for a moment that the person that you're sending this to, the hiring manager, the recruiter, whoever it may be, actually reads this letter. And what are you trying to tell them in the cover letter? Are you trying to tell them about yourself professionally? Are you trying to tell them a story of your flagship accomplishment in your project? Are you in your project career? Are you trying to tell them about some context to your resume? Or are you just summarizing your resume? These are all things to think about when you're writing that cover letter, because I can't definitively say, yes, it's a great idea, or no, it's a terrible idea. But what I can do is use this question to say, let's think about the purpose. Let's think about the context, not just the content, because if it's a role for a technical PM where they're looking for a PM that knows how to implement ERP systems, if you've never done that, now is your chance to say, I've never done an ERP implementation, but I've done this, this, and this, which can add value to your team and maybe something that you haven't seen before. Because this is where you turn that resume in an attempt into a living, breathing storytell. This is how I interpret a cover letter. It's not just about what have I done or it's to grab their attention and say, yes, this is the person that I want to talk to. This is the person that I want to hear more from, because your resume, they're going to glance at it. If you're one person that puts in a cover letter out of 30 people they're looking at, they might actually read that because you're the one person that put the effort forth. But if you can't, it's just like a social media post or anything else. But if you can't grab their attention in the first 30 seconds, they're going to probably skim through, gloss over everything that's important in there, and then just move on to the next. So think about when you're writing a cover letter, think about what you're trying to transfer to the reader and how you're telling that story, because that's what it is. It's a story that you're trying to tell. It's an addendum to your resume, not a summarization of your resume. So use that cover letter, if you're thinking about it, as context to why you think you would be a great candidate for this role, or why your expertise is uniquely qualifying you for this role. Those are the kinds of things I think about when I write a cover letter, because I want it to add to my resume, not be an equivalent of my resume. So, and the best advice I've been given historically is always one page maximum. Don't make it overly complicated, and don't be afraid to let some of your personality shine through in that. It doesn't have to be, yes, it needs to be professional, but it can also be a glimpse into you as a person, as to how you write, how you communicate, because resumes are all going to generally look the same. They're all going to sound the same. They're all tailored to the role. But this is where you get that chance to add a little bit of flair and context to what you're doing. So the next question I got was, what's something teams repeatedly do that leaders often mistake for a motivation problem when it's really an environmental problem? Now, this is one that there's a lot to unpack in this, in my opinion, because I've seen leaders make a lot of mistakes. And I think back, my first thought was thinking back to my military time, where we used to always say false motivation is better than no motivation. And if you're prior military, you know what that means. And if you're not, allow me to explain. It's when we're out there cheering and saying the catchphrases and the random things but where nobody's motivated at all to do anything, but we're all saying it, we're all shouting it, we're all doing it ironically. And then somewhere along the line, that fake motivation becomes real motivation, because we're all just kind of making the joke so much that through that suffering and misery, everybody kind of bonds together and creates that thread to where we all push forward and we all start actually caring a little bit more, because you do the work for the person next to you, not the person in front of you. If that's a equivalent to the corporate world, it's in project work, the teammates are trying to make sure that everybody's pulling their weight on the team, not to make the PM look good or the executives look good, but to make each other look good. So that's kind of one thing I think about when I'm reading this, is the environment is the key. If you create an environment structurally where everybody's miserable and nobody wants to do anything, then guess what? No, nothing is going to get done. And a real world example of this right now for me is I hate doing these types of solo shows. I really enjoy having a guest. I really enjoy having somebody to talk to. But when I'm staring at my own face in the screen, talking to myself, it gets kind of old. So what I had to do was, there were probably about 5 or 6 times I was saying, all right, I got to do this. I got to get ready to record. But when I did my prep, I was starting to think about, why am I doing this? What am I doing this for? What is the goal of the show? And then I realized, oh, it's it's bigger than me. It's for the audience. It's for the listeners. It's for the people that had these questions and wanted my opinion. So what I do is I think about, as a leader, not just what does the team need, or not just what do I need, but what does the team need? Sometimes I've said it repeatedly that when I'm in kickoff meetings and I'm in a room full of subject matter experts and I'm sitting there talking to them, and I say, hey, I'm the dumbest person in the room because my expertise is in project management. And that gets a laugh, that creates a little self-deprecation, but that also creates a team structure where everybody understands that I'm not up there holding myself on a pedestal. I'm up there as my expertise is in project management, and I'm relying on my experts and my team to be able to be the ones who know how to do stuff rather than me. So I think that leaders often mistake lack of motivation when they don't see people bought into the system. But the biggest problem with a leader is, a leader has to live what they say. They've got to be the person that's out there living what they're saying more than they are saying it. So if you're saying we need to be doing these values and we need to live in this core structure, well, guess what? If you're not the one that's exceeding the standard that you've set forth of what you expect out of people, they see that and then they mirror what you do. And usually, as a leader, you should be exceeding the standard by 20%. So my my age old one is thinking about showing up on time. If you're the leader, you should be there 10 minutes prior or 5 minutes prior to the start, getting your stuff ready, being ready to go so that when everybody walks in, you can say, "Hey, how's it going? What's up?" Talk to everybody as they're walking in, greet them, let them know that you were here and you care. And then guess what happens? When you showcase that when you set that as a standard that you're there early and you're prepared and you're ready to go and we start on time, then everybody else shows up on time, prepared, and even a few minutes early sometimes if they can, because they want to they want to meet their leadership where they are, not where they say they are. If you're a leader that says, "I expect everybody here on time," and you're chronically late, guess what's going to happen? Everybody else is going to start showing up late because you're the person that sets the standard. And if you're saying you need to be here before I am, well, that's just not going to work for everybody. So I think that as a leader, the motivation piece is the environment, meaning that it's the environment that you create around your team as to how do you motivate them by showing up, by leading by example, by doing the things that you say you want people to do. You've got to be exemplifying that and showcasing that more so than anyone else. And then over time, your team will follow you because they see you living what you're talking about rather than just saying, "I expect everybody to do this," and then you don't follow through. Because that also sends a very clear message of it's rules for thee, but not for me kind of thing. And as somebody who's been on teams like that, I just look at the leader and I laugh at him and I say, "Okay, you're going to tell me to do this, but you're not going to be willing to follow through on what you ask for. Then why should I?" And they get the bare minimum and they create a terrible environment because everybody on the team says the same thing. They're only willing to go so far as the leadership is showing that they can. So that's something to really think about is it's motivation is created by demonstration, in my opinion. So if you're leading by example, or if you're trying to lead, the example you set speaks volumes louder than what you say. So keep that in mind. Actions are noticed and actions speak louder. If you're asking for everybody to have their status updates by 3 o'clock on Tuesday, then you got to be ready to compile them at 3:01 to have them out by, we'll say, 5 o'clock on Tuesday. Because if you're chasing people down every week, then guess what happens? Then you're delayed by the sending them out. And you're also setting the standard that it's okay to show up late. But if you say updates are done or due by 3, and then you send out the update saying no updates reported by this person, you're subtly calling that person out and saying, "I didn't get it. I've done that before." And then eventually that person that keeps not providing updates, they get tracked down or leadership starts asking questions. And then that's when the examples start showing up is that's the environment that you're creating is you're creating an environment of accountability. So if your team is seeing that email, that status email, and then one person is repeatedly not updating their information, everybody else sees that and sees that they got called out subtly. And they start saying, "I don't want that to be me." So think about those kinds of things as a leader because the motivation is rarely the problem. It's the environment. And as this question asks, I think that motivation comes with the environment itself. So think about that as we're moving through things and as you're working with projects and working as a leader, what is the environment that you're creating by your actions, not by your words? So the next question was any tips about miscalculations in the process, like a 20% overtime that bleeds into another project timeline. How do I personally manage these things? Well, we'll start with where did the miscalculation occur? Was it based off of assumptions, a bad WBS? Was it based off of we just didn't anticipate the amount of work that this task was going to require, and we were off by our estimate. There's nefarious things, and then there's honest mistakes. And I think that that's the first step, is to figure out, where did that miscalculation come from? Because something as simple as, we were trying to figure out what the duration of a task was. We used story points, estimation, all these different tools to come in, and we did all the math on the back of a napkin, and somebody didn't forgot to carry the one, and instead of 5 hours, it should have been 15 hours. Well, that's an honest mistake. It's a big mistake, but it's an honest mistake. And that's where you start figuring out, okay, we made a bad math error. How do we correct this? How do we collapse the schedule? How do we do whatever we need to do to make this work? Or do we just live with it, push the schedule out? Other things are delayed, and that's just the way it goes sometimes, because we've all seen it go both ways. And that's the unfortunate part of project work, is there are no absolutes. So that's the first thing, is look at your assumptions, look at your math, look at your estimation tools and techniques, and figure out, where did it come from? Where did the miscalculation come from first? Because if it was an honest mistake, we live with that, we work through it, and we make it up somewhere else on the back end, or we delay. And when that starts bleeding into other people's projects, as soon as you realize this error occurred, you have to go to that person and tell them. You have to talk to them. Same thing. Explain to them, hey, I messed up on the math. I messed up on the WBS. I didn't anticipate the amount of labor that this was going to require. Whatever it may be, you've got to come to that person and talk to them and explain, here's where we're at. Here's the delay I'm seeing. And then work with that other PM or those other PMs to figure out, how does all this tie in together? Because I had a guest on a previous episode where they talked about, they had this whole status update for their project, the person going before them, and it was all dependent on the project before them. And the person before them said, yeah, we're delayed 2 months. So that threw his entire project off. And he went up there and just said, yeah, see the other guy? I'm delayed 2 months now. Doesn't matter what I do. That's the way it goes sometimes with project work and dependencies. And we've got to have these conversations and be as proactive as we can about having those conversations, because the more reactive you become, the more you're on your heels, you're dancing around, you're making up stuff as you go, rather than looking at the situation and saying, okay, this is the hand I'm dealt. This is what I got to deal with. This is where we're going with this, and then move forward. We don't get to pick the battles that we're in sometimes. We've just got to pick, how do we handle the situations that we get? So those are the things that I look at. Is it's not about the bad hand the situations. It's about, how do you react? How do you deal with it? Because we as PMs and we as decision makers, we always look at things, and I've seen it both sides, where you look at every bad thing that happens, it's somebody's out to get you. Somebody's out to sabotage you. And that's really not always the case. More often than not, it's just bad luck, bad things happen, life happens, all those different situations. And sometimes you've just got to work through it and try to make the best of a bad situation sometimes. And if it's your project that was impacted, start thinking about contingency plans. Start thinking about, how do you see this stuff happening? And are you watching, if your project is dependent on other people's, are you watching them? Are you talking to those PMs? Are you talking to those stakeholders about their projects if your project is dependent on them? Because we spend so much time wrapped up in our own bubble, we forget that other things happen outside of our projects and outside of our bubbles, and we need to be aware of them, not in-depth aware, but at least tangentially enough to know that if I could see somebody else's project is going off the rails before it goes, I can adjust my stuff to account for that, rather than waiting for it to happen. And I could even say to the other person, hey, I see this is starting to come off the rails a little bit just from the outside. Am I missing something, or am I telling you something you didn't see? Because once again, when you're too close to something, you tend to miss things. but when you zoom out a little bit, sometimes the picture is more clear than when you're zoomed in. So let's move on to, is there this was sent to me by somebody who's breaking into the PM profession. Is there a cheat sheet I have for things as far as learning the terminology a bit as far as learning the terminology, it becomes a bit overwhelming at first. First thing I will say is there are tons of great PM trainers out there especially on LinkedIn. They are experts in their craft of teaching and training and preparing you. So I'm not going to recommend any one specific person, but what I would say is find that pocket of LinkedIn or social media where the PM trainers hang out. It's not hard to find it. Just search for PMP trainers and start reading their content. Start looking at their stuff. Most of them have some sort of a cheat sheet, quick reference guides. They're probably not free, but they're available. And just remember about when something is free, that usually means that you have no vested interest in it. So you could collect, and I'm guilty of this too. I'll collect 20 books on weight training, on working out. And they sit there in my hard drive because I signed up for the newsletter and I had the best of intentions of reading it, but I never read any of them because I didn't pay anything for them. There was no skin in the game. It was signing up for a newsletter that I actually wanted to get probably anyways. So my advice is on something like this is to pay for some quality reference materials, pay for a course, pay for something that forces you to actually hold yourself accountable, because once you put some money into something, you become a whole lot different perspective on it because you've paid your money for it. You work hard for your money. And thinking about that aspect, you're like, I want to get my money's worth out of this. So you're going to reference those. You're going to look at that material. You're going to read those guides. You're going to study that material. The next thing is the go-to for every PM is the PMBOK and PMI's website. I mean, there's tons of stuff out there from PMI for PMI members. There's more stuff. If you're really curious about doing things like this, I also encourage you to go to AI and ask it for some reference material. But then what I would do is I would take that reference material, like that the LLM spits out, and I would type it up myself. I would make it so that you have a vested interest in this. You put skin in the game, you put time involved. And one other thing that happens is when you write something out, whether it's, especially when you handwrite it, but when you type it too, you retain a different level of information than reading it. So thinking about that, if you're just retyping something that AI spit out, at least you're putting yourself through the effort of making it yourself, and you can make it your own in a format that works for your mind, in a structure that works for you, whether that's an organization of the terms, how you phrase them, words that mean something to you to be able to help you remember what the difference between an RFP and RFI is, those types of things. Just thinking about it in ways that make you put a little bit of effort in means you'll get way more out of it than if you just download 10 tips for passing your PMP, or here's the top 100 terms that every PM should know. If you download that stuff, that's great, but ask yourself, are you going to pull it out and look at it and read it and try to learn, or do you need to force yourself to spend some time going through the PMBOK and looking up terms and reading and writing them out by hand, writing them, typing out your own cheat sheet and doing things like that? This is exactly why I created PM Monday as well. So every Monday on LinkedIn, I put out a post in the afternoon about a PM term, and I break it down in the most basic of language that everybody can understand. Because one of the things that I discovered as a PM is terms mean different things to different people. And we talk all day long about definitions and common language. Well, when I'm using Agile is my favorite example, because me and Sean Wallach use the example of big A Agile and little a Agile. If I'm talking about Agile, the methodology, to somebody without properly defining the term, and I'm talking to a stakeholder about, we're going Agile, we're doing this, we're doing that. And then they'd think, oh, agile. Oh, they're just moving fast and adapting really quickly, which that's kind of the definition of agile, but there's a lot more to it. And there's context lost. So what I wanted to do was create this series where for over a year now, I've been doing this every Monday. It's a PM term. And one of the things I've learned is as I'm researching out these terms every week and breaking them down into the simplest possible explanation of what it is, I'm relearning it. I'm remembering things I'd forgotten because going back to that baseline assumption thing, I assume I remember what it means, but over time, the terms have morphed to what they mean in context of a meeting rather than what they actually mean. And sometimes that baseline agreement and understanding what you're saying changes the game, which is why these this reference material is so important if you're starting out, because if you don't learn the terms properly, you don't know how to reference them properly. So that's my take on that. And I would always say, follow me for the PM Monday series. Every Monday afternoon, it's coming out. Every Monday, it's a new term. I've gone from the most complicated of things like the methodologies to recently, I've been focusing on basic things like stakeholders, sponsors, as subject matter experts, those kinds of things too, because we forget what those mean because they change based off of who's speaking and what they're trying to say. And there are textbook definitions, there's contextual definitions, but remember that it's always about common language because we think about these terms. And if you don't put kind of the brackets around what you mean when you use a term that could mean different things, guess what happens? It means three different things to three different people on the team because an engineer, a data, an engineer, a network systems admin, and a developer could all hear the same word and think three different terms of definition. And then the PM speaking says, oh, this means this. Now everybody is on the same page of what it means because we're creating that common language. So think about that also, that when you're researching these cheat sheets, think about the context that they're being used. Think about the framing of these terms, because if you're finding PM cheat sheets on an AI website, they're framed through the AI lens. If you're finding them on a PM website, then they're framed through the lens of a project manager. And sometimes you don't want the terms that a PM uses in a PM sense. You want them in another term because that's how you can relate to your team. So that's my long-winded answer of that. What is one thing you encourage the project management community on a whole to address that will be beneficial to the future? Oh boy, this is my soapbox that I really enjoy standing on and preaching about, because it is that we are experts in our own field. If you are a project manager by trade, you are specializing in the art and science of project management. And I think that the profession itself has lost sight of, we want to be so inclusive of everyone that we forget that we need to be exclusive about who we are and what we do. Because the idea, I've written about this in the past, that there's so much content out there about everybody's a project manager, everybody does this, so they have the skills to become a PM. And I think that at a baseline level, that is true. There are a lot of skills that a lot of different professions use that we use. But I would turn that around and say, we talk all day long about soft skills, about communication skills, about alignment, and all these different soft skills that we talk about leading through influence. Does leading through influence and being able to negotiate resources and all these things mean that I could go be a skilled negotiator? Probably not. I could walk into being a negotiator at a baseline knowledge level of, I know enough to make myself dangerous. But if you go to somebody who's skilled in the art of negotiation, they will eat you for lunch, because we're walking in there thinking, I understand how to do this. and I've scratched the surface of the knowledge. But what you haven't done is you haven't done the homework. You haven't done the specialization in the art and science of those professions. And I think that we as PMs give that expertise away by trying to convince everybody that everybody's a PM instead of saying, you may do PM stuff, but you are not a project manager. And I don't mean that by title. I mean that by profession and by trade, because there is a lot that goes into being a professional project manager. And I don't mean, and once again, not by title, but by what we do for a living. We manage expectations. We react to chaos. We herd cats. We put order into a chaotic plan. We do all those catchphrases, but I don't hear people talking about all those other things that we do on a daily basis where we're talking about why we're so special and why we're so great, as everybody does that. Everybody does planning. Okay, great. Planning is a fraction of our job. Everybody does reporting. Reporting is a fraction of our job. Does everybody know how to arrange for a stakeholder that doesn't want to make a decision, and then you have to be the PM who says, we need this decision, and essentially use a soft skill to strong arm that decision maker to make that decision by the time that you need to keep your critical path going. And also remember, oh, by the way, you're doing all of this by influence, because you can't force anyone to do anything, because we don't even own the resources that we use. We're borrowing them from other functional managers. Now, you take into account that we're talking about, other people talk. I've had people say, well, I've led sales teams. I can be a PM. And I even remember this. I was in a networking group, and one person said that they wanted to get into project management because they were tired of being in charge. They were tired of being the manager of people. And I laughed because I was like, that's what we do for a living. We manage people, except you get the authority of having the functional management role. We don't even get that. We get to go in there and talk to people and coerce them and convince them that they want to help us achieve our goals with their time. So I think that we've given away a lot of the minutia that we argue about in the profession to the outside world by letting them all say that everyone is a project manager when you're not. And I will take some heat for this probably, and I don't care, but I take pride in being a project professional. I've been one for close to 15 years. I've done it in a variety of capacities. In the beginning, yeah, I didn't have the title. I didn't know what I was doing. But as I've learned the art and the science of it, I take pride in what I do. I take pride in the fact that I can walk into a meeting and hear an idea, build out a plan, build out a roadmap, and then also react to the chaos that occurs throughout that roadmap, and do this all with no functional authority. That's a skill set that not everybody has and not everybody learns off the bat. You've got to take time to figure this out, and you've got to take time in the seat to do it. And just because you don't have the title of project manager doesn't mean you're not doing the work, or you're not learning the work, I should say. You aren't doing the work without the title, because let's be honest, we could say all day long that we've all seen it, that the lead engineer is also running the project. And I've said this before numerous times too, that if you're doing a PM role and you're also doing a lead engineer role in the same project as the same person, you're doing one of two things is going to happen. Either the engineering is going to be amazing and the chaos and the project is going to fall off the rails terribly because nobody knew how to manage it, or you're going to have mediocre work and mediocre management because the person that's doing both can't dedicate themselves to one or the other. They've got to do both, and they're going to do both poorly because you can't dedicate yourself to either one. In smaller projects, that can work maybe because it's a smaller, less resource heavy, less defined thing. But when you start getting into these bigger projects, a project professional needs to be there, and we need to take pride in what we do. We need to take pride in the skills that we have. We need to take pride in the role that we fill. And it's not something that you can do just by saying, I do planning. I built a Gantt chart. I do reporting. It's more than that, and we all know it. And I think that we need to start taking some pride in what we do and the skills that we've learned and tried to perfect over time. So, what advice would you give someone who wants to enter the project management field now? Well, this is actually something that I can speak very well to, because I had this happen back in May. Somebody reached out to me with this exact question because they were in a software developer type role and wanted to move into transition into project management. So the first thing I said was, go to the PMO. If you're working on a project as a software developer, go to that PM, talk to them, make sure that this is the role that you want to be doing in your organization, because I can give you advice about being a PM all day long, but I'm not inside your organization. I don't know how the world works according to organization X. So the first thing is to talk to that PM of your project, because you've got the best, ideally you should have the best relationship with them. And if the field is something you want to pursue of project management, ask them how you can help them. Ask them what they're doing. Talk to them. Ask them for their time to be able to sit down and explain what they're doing and how the project is working from a PM side of the house rather than the development side that you see. Then this particular person that I'm speaking about started getting pulled into the PMO, the PM started actually having them shadow them and starting to work with them more. And I think that, once again, to my last question, we are project professionals. We do our job professionally and we take pride in it, ideally. So, and when someone asks you that they want to get into the field, take the time and actually teach them things. Teach them, this is why I'm doing this way, or this is why this happens this way, and start guiding them through the product life cycle and the project life cycle, and explain the whys to the things that we're doing, and give them kind of a peek behind the curtain, because that's what we do. Is we have the front row seat to the behind the scenes of the project. Show them how all the sausage is made, so to speak, and how we get things done. Because once they start learning, once somebody who's interested in the profession starts actually seeing what day-to-day life is, that will help them determine, is this a field I want to go into? Then I always advise, I used to not do this, but I will always advise now, if this is a field that you really want to go into, I will say join PMI and take their free courses, because PMI has some free courses on introductions to Agile, introduction to Waterfall, introduction to project management. There's tons of information just that's free through a membership to learn more about what the methodologies, what the science is like, what the art is like, all of that kind of stuff. And then once you've figured all that out, start deciding if the CAPM is a good idea. I used to say the CAPM was worthless and be the biggest naysayer of it. But as I've built my career, I say, go for it, do it, because not everybody is going to be able to sit for the PMP and pass it and do that effectively. And then also, most importantly, live up to the expectation of the PMP. Because while I know there's a lot of discussion of the value of the PMP, those who have it and earned it hold people with that to a standard. And if you don't have the expertise and the knowledge, and you just kind of massage the truth, so to speak, to get to where you need to be able to take it, and then you pass it, and you don't have that prerequisite experience and that prerequisite knowledge, it's going to show through. And then you're just not going to be the person that everyone wants you to be. And then that becomes a problem even more, because that goes into your credibility. So the CAPM is a great place to start with that. And most importantly, talk to the PMs in your company. Talk to the PMO director. Ask them for some time to sit down and say, I want to become a PM. How do I do this? Where do I go? What can I do to help your team? And be prepared for some extra work. But that extra work comes with extra knowledge. And that extra knowledge comes with your transition from what you were doing into the PMO. And I would also add that I just had this conversation with someone this morning, actually, that be prepared to take a pay cut too, because if you're going from senior developer to project coordinator, I don't know that a lot of companies will be able to pay you what you were making as a N1 role to take a step back to essentially not start a career over, but take a step in your career back to take 3 steps forward later. Because one thing we always forget is when you change careers, your knowledge is not lost. Your expertise is not lost. So you have that expertise as a developer, as whatever it was that you did before you became a PM, to learn how to use that knowledge in the project management space. And if you're just graduating from college or just getting out into the professional world and want to get into project management, same rule applies, but also remember that if you don't have a previous skill, now you're into a territory of, I've got to learn how to do this. And this is what I need to dedicate my whole career or my whole life to right now, and be prepared to take the grunt. And when you're starting out in the profession, be prepared to take the grunt work. Be prepared to be the one that's taking notes in meetings. Be prepared to be the one who compiles the status updates into the PowerPoint slides and then hands them over to the PM. We've all been there. We all had to earn it. But that is the biggest thing that I can advise you to, is find out how it works in your organization first, and then also seek out, consume content on social media, on LinkedIn, wherever it may be, and find people that you respect their opinion of and ask them for their time. Most people will say yes if you say, I want to talk to you about something, and be prepared when you sit down to talk to them. Have your questions ready. Have what you want to get out of that conversation scheduled in advance, so that when you sit down with that person, you're not wasting their time. I remember vividly, I was mentoring someone, and at least 3 times the call went into 30 seconds of silence. And then I finally told the person, I'm like, look, you've lost me every time there's a break in the conversation. Every time there's silence, that tells me, if you're not telling me, hey, I'm writing this down right now, so bear with me. Okay. That I get why there's some silence, because you're writing things down and you want to make sure you take your notes. But if there's a question and then there's silence and you're thinking of the next thing to talk about, that tells me you came into this unprepared. So be prepared when you get somebody's time. Be prepared and be interesting enough with your questions, with your topics, with your agenda for that meeting, to keep the other person interested. Because when you lose that person's interest, it's just like losing the interest of a supervisor, of a stakeholder, of anything. They start finding other things to do, and they're just going to autopilot mode of answering your questions. But if you keep them engaged and interested, they're actually giving you real questions, real answers, real thoughts. What's the most common hidden project risk that PMs overlook, and how should they surface and manage it before it becomes a problem? So I would go with the obvious first of the most common hidden project risk is in the assumptions. And I say that because we all sit down in project kickoff meetings, or meetings where we're building our charters and all that stuff. And we're sitting there building out our baseline assumptions. And then we move on, and nobody ever questions those assumptions. Nobody ever asks, are these still valid? Are these still real? Is this what we think it means? Because a baseline assumption of something like inflation will stay constant on a 5-year project. Inflation will stay constant to what? Because if you look around the world right now, there is so much chaos going on that you can't predict what's going to go on with inflation in the next 30 days, never mind the next year. Or, something like our budget will increase 10% every year, year over year on a 10-year project. Okay, that's a great assumption, but going back to the inflation piece, are you looking at the inflation and saying, will that keep pace? Because when you start looking at how we're building our assumptions into these projects, are we baselining those as they're just things that we do, or are we actually looking at how these assumptions frame the conversation? Um, One of the other hidden risks I will say is, I already mentioned it earlier, is language definitions. If we're not defining what words mean, what keywords mean in a project in the beginning, then everybody else down the line is going to be confused. And then when somebody comes into the meeting new that uses the term incorrectly, nobody's going to correct them. And then definitions become blurry. One of the things I do on the RACI is I put responsible, and then I put a bubble above that to say, what does responsible mean? Accountable. What does accountable mean? What does consulted mean? What does informed mean? And I define those on the actual document, and I put them above the letter or below the letter so that everybody that's looking at that knows this is what this means. I think that language is something that we overlook because everybody wants to move on so quickly that we forget slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Sometimes you have to slow things down a little bit to define terms, to get alignment, because we use that term a lot, alignment. What does it mean? Does it mean that everybody agrees to the same thing, or that everybody's on the same page? So those are the kinds of things I think about when I think about that. And I also want to pause here, which is really late in the episode normally, but I want to pause here and talk about the Patreon that I have, because this is how you can support the show. This is where every guest that comes on participates in a bonus conversation. And that's the postmortem interviews. For $5 a month, you get access to every guest's postmortem interview. They talk about something completely different than what we talked about in the main show. They share their expertise, give actionable tips. It really is something that is valuable if you care, if you enjoy the show and you want to hear more. It's also the way to support me and support the show, because none of this is free, but I enjoy doing it, so I do it. And it would be nice if I could get a little bit of help to fund the bills for it. There will be no postmortem interview for this episode, just because I'm answering all the questions that came in, and I really don't think anybody wants to hear me talk more than they already are. So with that, I'll tackle the last question is, will AI replace PMs? And my most definitive answer to this is no, not even close, because I like to tell this story a lot, that I didn't get the front row seat for it, but I've talked to enough PMs who have, that when the project management tools came out, all the advanced tools where we took project and they crammed everything into it. And they said, you can do it all here and now, everything all in one place, all in one deliverable website or tool. And that was great. But the problem was the PMs, and they said that we said the same thing. We said the sky is falling, PMs are going to get replaced. Well, guess what? PMs did get replaced because we adapted. We learned to use the tool as a tool. And the same for AI. It is a tool. It is not going to replace us. It will replace the PMs that don't adapt to the modern era of using AI, using the PPM tools, using all those different things. It will replace you if you do that. It will also replace you if you are an admin PM, meaning all you do is schedules, notes, generic reports, things like that. You don't actually do any of the other stuff that we talk about all day. Yeah, AI can replace that, but you still need somebody to put the information into the tool. So think about it in the context of, if you're not adapting to what the modern era of project management is, you will be left behind. You will become a dinosaur. You will go extinct. And that's blunt, but that's the truth. You know, I fought AI personally for a very long time until I realized it's not going anywhere. So I started using it and learning how to use it. And that's the other thing, is understand how to use these tools. Pick one AI tool that you like and learn how to make that thing do everything it is that you need to do. Because when we spread ourselves out so thin across 10 tools, we learn 10 different things, but you don't master one. And when you don't master one, then guess what happens? You're scratching the surface of each one, but then when someone says, "Hey, we need this," you don't know how to do it because you've just learned the basics of 10 different tools, but you can't do anything advanced on any of them. So that's my advice on that kind of stuff is find your tool of choice. Doesn't matter which one it is, doesn't matter why. And I use this for I say this for PPM tools too, because you don't have to know every PPM tool. You don't even have to know one really well. But what you do have to know is how to find the information to use it and how to make it work for you or your work according to your organization. So those are the kinds of things that I would suggest and think about with AI. I don't think it's replacing PMs. It never will. You will, going back to my previous answer about, you will always need somebody that understands the art and science of project management to make a project get delivered on time. Because without somebody who's managing everything, details get lost. Chaos happens. Nobody's managing the schedule. The schedule becomes a relic, and it's just by vibes and feelings and just fires to put out. If there's somebody there actively managing it, they're controlling the flow, they're controlling where things go and how it's done. So these are all the things that I'd like to impart to the audience is think about this type of stuff a little bit more. And also, I want to end with thanking all the Patreon subscribers, as I mentioned earlier, thanking the listeners, most importantly, because you're the people that submitted these questions, which I'm humbled by that enough listeners came up with these questions to send to me to be like, hey, I want your thoughts on this. I value I'm assuming they value my opinion on things and that they wanted to hear it. Don't forget to like and subscribe and follow on all the social media stuff, do all the commenting, all that fun stuff that it feeds the algorithm and it helps feed everything else that I'm doing to make the show more aware to other people. And I'll end like I always do. May all your deliverables be on time, your budget's in the black, and your scope not creeping. For myself, I'm still Trevor, and I'm still the disgruntled PM. Thanks for listening, everyone.